Hi, welcome to part 6 of our vlog for men. I'm Pastor Dan, one of the pastors at Temple Baptist Church here in Cambridge, Ontario, and this is Men to Men. Men to Men has a message that's rooted in the Bible, and it comes from Proverbs chapter 27, verse 17. And it says this: "As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another." If I was to bring out one steep, dark secret that 64% of men in the world share, what do you think that would be? It could be anger. As you know, we all have to figure out to see how that comes into our lives and how we deal with that emotion. So that's not really what we're talking about here. What about maybe pride? We've talked about that one before in a previous vlog. If you haven't seen that one, you should stop now and go back and see that previous vlog. What about when we are getting ourselves in too deep? Well, that attaches ourselves to pride and sometimes our own sense of security, our identity. That's also one that we previously talked about. Would it surprise you if I was to suggest that what 64% of men in the world are dealing with today is this: lust? Actually, I don't think it's that much of a secret that we have an industry globally that has set itself up around the whole idea of arousing men and women sexually. This multi-billion-dollar industry of porn is seeping into our culture. It's creeping into our workplaces, and it's insidious in the way it goes after our families. Now, some research that's been done by George Barna tells us this: that 64% of men admit to viewing pornography at least monthly. Now, this devastating statistic is actually something that is breaking apart our spousal relationships. It's something that is devastating to our families. It's breaking our society up. What explains this destructive behaviors? Scientists tell us that when we're aroused, we release chemicals that create and draw us closer to a sense of intimacy, which makes perfect sense when we're dealing with our spouse. But when those chemicals are released in relationships that we're not designed to be in, then it actually does the opposite effect. We have this false sense of intimacy that gets broken, and then that creates within us a sense of shame and a sense of isolation where we've broken something. When we short circuit what God has designed, what's best for us, we then have that withdrawal. We want to pull back, and that sense of shame just takes over. Now, isn't that the complete opposite of what God desires in this relationship? I've heard it said, what we abuse for our individual pleasure actually results in more isolation and damage. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18, Paul says this: we need to flee all sorts of sexual immorality, all kinds. So how do we handle this? Well, being alone doesn't work. We've seen that isolation actually just makes things worse. Pride works against us. It actually digs the hole deeper. And passivity, not acting on it at all, drives us further and further into this sin. What do we need to do? How do we deal with this? Well, we need to set aside the pride and then break that isolation. We need to take some action steps. Carefully choose a brother. We've got our band of brothers. Pick one that you trust and start a conversation. You need to pray together, and you need to ask those tough questions. We need to ask, how is your thought life? How are you dealing with seeing that woman? What is it that triggers you? How do you deal with that? Ask those questions and answer them honestly. This is an amazingly strong and courageous act. It means we need to be open, courageously, and vulnerable. If that doesn't work, if that's not helping, you need to seek better help. Find a professional who can walk through this with you. You can be released from this. The main conduit into our lives right now of this particular evil is electronic. Unfortunately, it's everywhere. We carry it in our pocket. It's on our screens at work. It's on our TVs in our home. You know, there's things we can do about that. You can set viewing guides. You can get software that restricts things for you. You can get software that just sends a message to your partner to let them know that you're struggling. You need to be transparent with your spouse or your significant other. Let them help you. Now think about some Bible stories. There's Judah in the Old Testament who struggled with his lust. He struggled hard. And yet God still used him because he was repentant, because he opened his heart to follow God. And he took the steps he needed to take. Also in the Old Testament was King David. We talked a little bit about his story, how he fell in his lust for another man's wife and spiraled out of control. And yet God used him as king, as prophet, as warrior. And he is listed in the lineage of our Savior Jesus because his heart was open and repentant to deal with his sin. And what about Paul in the New Testament? He writes on this a fair bit. In fact, I've already quoted him today. You know, he says we need to flee all forms of sexual immorality. So he must have had some sort of temptation there. I think as a man, he understood what we're talking about today. The benefits of being pure are a blessing from God. It's amazing when we focus on what God desires for our relationships. Don't go alone into this battle, guys. Find your band of brothers. Find that one that you trust and you will talk with. Seek Jesus together, truthfully and truly live an adventurous life. I want you guys to lead well. I'm Dan, and this is Men to Men.